think it's time to cue up our first speaker, who is Imber Black. And I'd like to get her on Zoom. Is she there? Oh, good morning, Evan. How are you?
Okay.
Good. Good. So we can see you. I don't think you can see anybody but me right now. But, okay, once people start asking questions, they will be at a microphone and the camera will pan to the microphone so that you can see who's asking you questions, okay? We're kicking off this symposium with Evan for a variety of reasons. Most of you know that she was the prior editor of the Family Process Journal. She continues to be a full professor at the Marriage and Family Therapy program at Mercy College in Dobbs Ferry, New York. She's a director and senior faculty member at the Ackerman Institute for the Family in New York, and she continues to practice private therapy as well. Evan is a wealth of information. At the 50th anniversary of Family Process, she did an amazing 5-decade overview of changes in cultural issues, political issues in our country. So we asked her to recap just changes over the last 10 years, which have come fast and furiously. So she's going to be giving us a flavor of some of the social, cultural, and political changes over the last decade. Okay, Evan?
Thank you. An age of promise and provocation. Family therapy meets social and political demands of the 21st century. We hire white Christian help only. The sign on the wall of my Chicago neighborhood roller rink shockingly screamed at my 10-year-old eyes. The year was 1954. In tears and not fully understanding what I was reading, as a very young Jewish girl, I turned and ran out the door with a mixture of confusion and despair. Our dinner table was filled with conversations of my father's volunteer work against redlining in real estate. His efforts were intended to make housing available to World War II immigrants and second-generation Jewish families in neighborhoods that banned them, just as Donald Trump's father and later Trump himself had done in Queens, New York, to Jews and African Americans. It would be my responsibility to pick up the effort in 1966 Chicago's Freedom Summer, led by Dr. King, now to open white neighborhoods to people of color. Working for the American Friends Service Committee, I was put in charge of real estate testing in places like the infamous and racist Cicero, Illinois, finding loads of apartments and houses for rent as a white woman, to be followed just 20 minutes later by people of color for whom nothing was available. I sat in one office with no lights on as the realtor whispered he didn't want anyone to know his office was open. In another, I could see the salesman through the glass, but the door was locked and I had to knock quite hard to be let in. We marched in all white neighborhoods every weekend. Our cars were set afire. Faces of the counter demonstrators were distorted with a hatred my naive 22-year-old self had never before seen. Police, supposedly there to protect us, picked up neighborhood rock-throwing thugs only to let them out a block or two away. And Dr. King was knocked down by a brick to his head. Nonviolence sustained us that summer, but by September, anguish had set in for many. The best of the last 60 years of family therapy are those filled with commitments to social and political justice. For me, starting to become a family therapist began in Berkeley, California, where at once the federal government paid us to lead and research encounter groups, hard to imagine today, while out our windows, that same government shot off tear gas to stop the demonstrations against the Vietnam War. I grew disenchanted with leading stranger groups and was fortunate to discover a field called family therapy. Divorced, mother to a 5- and 3-year-old, and our 2 cats, I packed our nearly falling apart car and headed to my doctoral program at the University of Pittsburgh, where I was blessed by the colleagueship and friendship of the late Carol Anderson, a doctoral program that encouraged me to invent what I needed, and an internship in the Steel Valley. This combination enabled me to envision the potential, the promise of family therapy to meet the social and political demands then of the 20th century and now of the 21st. Doing systems therapy with couples and families who worked in the steel mills enabled me to appreciate that therapy does not stop at the boundary of a family's household, but rather must stretch to encompass work, sometimes dangerous work, political processes such as unions, the impact of strikes, religious conviction, mostly Eastern European ethnicity and Catholic religion, race and racism of white workers towards workers of color, and gender discrimination as women workers received far less pay than men for the same grueling and hazardous jobs while being unable to hold credit cards in their own names. Unlike other fields of therapy, family therapy quickly proved itself capable of holding, working with, and successfully intervening in both the private interactional world of the couple or family and the exterior world of social and political changes and demands. In the 20th century, family therapy theorists and practitioners invented and designed models of practice, many of which still hold today, albeit with necessary contemporary changes. Nearly simultaneously, we began examining the impact of migration with the richly different models of Celia Falikoff and Monica McGoldrick. In the 1980s, thanks initially to the gauntlet thrown by the late Rachel Hare Mustin, we opened ourselves to the social world of gender and the absolute requirement to utilize the lens of feminism in all of our work. The first of 3 conferences comprising women leaders in the field, the first 2 at Stonehenge, Connecticut, brilliantly invented by Monica McGoldrick, Froma Walsh, and Carol Anderson, and the third, an international meeting created by the late Betty Carter, Monica McGoldrick, and myself, brought women together from Asia, Africa, Australia, Europe, and the US. Many of us learned for the first time that when a South Korean woman marries, she's removed from her family's tree forever and is required to join her husband's. The late Olga Silverstein urged us to count all the review editors of Family Process and the Journal of Marital and Family Therapy, and the officers of the major organizations. Perhaps no surprise, women comprise just 15%. We determined to make a full court press for change. And while it took nearly 30 years, we succeeded. None of this feminist critique in family therapy happened easily. As many of you may recall, the period in family therapy referred to as, quote, gender wars. I personally recall being publicly excoriated when, as the American Family Therapy Academy program chair, I dared to feature 15 women, including women of color, and 2 men as speakers on the program, circa 1993. I examined all the keynote speakers from the start of AFTA, only to discover, no surprise, white men were 80 to 90%. I simply called that year a mid-course correction and was joined at the awards banquet by women and our allies spontaneously belting out, "I am woman, hear me roar." And indeed, for a while, our numbers began to even out between men and women presenters and attendees. Gradually and sadly, our whole field, along with other helping professions, has become far more women than men. What, I wonder, does it mean that when women enter a field in large numbers, while the men go where? Business school? The 21st century, and especially the last 10 years, has witnessed profound changes in our field. Daily doses of nonstop, mostly tragic news, non-delayed and often superficial interpersonal connection and nonsense has seen a huge rise in stress, anxiety, and depression, or at least complaints of such. And while family therapy institutes have largely closed and family therapy has either faded in many parts of the US or become relabeled from what was once a vibrant movement to a, quote, modality, the need for our profession has never been greater. The requisite family therapy, I mean, does not stop at the walls of the family household or the doors to our offices or the virtual Zoom link. I recently came across a story of a biracial teen girl who was, quote, sold at a mock slave auction to a white girl she had believed was her good friend. She discovered this heartbreaking outrage in a Snapchat group entitled, quote, slave trade. Her school promised to swiftly deal with this, along with other online messages from high school kids, including, quote, all Blacks should die, and, quote, let's start another Holocaust. Suggestions by some parents of requiring training to address historic and present-day racial disparities and harassment was immediately met by a campaign from other parents that this would make the white children feel ashamed of their whiteness in this 90% white town. Interviews with Black, biracial, Native American, Latinx, immigrant, and LGBTQ students demonstrated that casual racism, sexism, xenophobia, and homophobia were woven into the fabric of their daily lives. White classmates and teammates called the Black students, quote, Niagara, in order to replace the N-word. The white conservative backlash grew as white parents insisted that their beloved Midwestern town was never racist and that trouble only began when, quote, they moved in. An anti-critical race theory movement sprung up rapidly. Quote, we don't even for a second think about race, said one of the parents. Indeed. An equity resolution designed by parents in the immediate aftermath of the horrific slave market phenomenon was quickly watered down, omitting any reference to applying, quote, a social equity and diversity lens to the school curriculum. There would be no addition of marginalized authors to the school library, and no class would be allowed to provide opportunities to learn about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. The teen girl who was, quote, traded in the Snapchat slave auction was distraught. She remarked, quote, "My peers should be ready to hear difficult truths about our country's past, especially the enslaving of Black people. If I am old enough to experience this kind of thing, other people are old enough to learn about it." This story raises profound questions. If children are old enough to behave in racist ways, when are they old enough to learn the ugly truths about racism in the United States? Are our public schools places to educate truly intelligent, knowledgeable citizens? Or are they indoctrination factories bent on continuing white supremacist ideology? As I'm sure most of you know, many states have passed laws intent on restricting what can be taught, both in public schools and public universities. For instance, Tennessee laws bans any teaching that, quote, could lead to an individual feeling guilt, anguish, or psychological distress because of race or sex. Translation, white or male. Some states outlaw words such as social justice, identity, and colonialism. I'm not sure where the Bill of Rights has disappeared. Other state laws add ancestry to the list and ban teaching that current generations bear any responsibility for the actions of the previous generations, including the responsibility to learn. And 5 Republican congressmen, just 13 months after the death of George Floyd, found time to introduce a bill banning the teaching of critical race theory without knowing just what this is in DC schools. In fact, these schools don't teach critical race theory, but did upset these congressmen by educating teachers and students in anti-racism and conversations about systemic racism. Whether or not these congressmen and many others want the truth taught to our children, in fact, most people of color have been raised under state-sponsored racism, told over and over there were no job openings, when in fact there were, and no available apartments or mortgages, despite both availability and clear qualifications. Research using Black and Latinx sounding last names on resumes and sent to large corporations could not get an interview, while resumes identical in experience to those with white sounding last names were quickly called in. The anti-critical race theory bunch clearly learned nothing from Germany's unbending and effective approach to teaching the Holocaust, fully intending to imbue students with some sense of responsibility and weight of the past. Our choice is clear. Do we teach our students in a growing, multi-ethnic, multiracial United States that both our past and present are fraught? Or do we, as W.E.B. Du Bois said, quote, turn history into propaganda? This painful story, repeated today in many variations across this country, cries out, indeed demands new ways to teach our children, to organize our communities, to work to change who gets elected, from the city council and the school board to the United States Congress and the presidency. And all of us who teach, train, and supervise new family therapists must hold tightly to and enact the belief that our field is emphatically not simply a modality, but rather a philosophy, a way to see the world and to envision lives made better by a systemic locus and posture. As the editor of Family Process from 2004 to 2012, I witnessed trends, new ideas, and the quite gradual but steady introduction of papers focused on race, immigration, Latinx families, and social class, especially poverty. These papers challenged stale concepts and dared us to see our work through new and progressive lenses. Among these, the paper by Anna Bauman, Melanie Domenech Rodriguez, and Ruben Para-Cardona, published 10 years ago, community-based applied research with Latino immigrant families, informing practice and research according to ethical and social justice principles, I believe leads the way, and especially stays in my heart, challenging the role of the researcher practitioner as one who must maintain distance, anonymity, and remoteness, no matter the suffering one witnesses. In this paper, again titled Community-Based Applied Research with Latino Immigrant Families, these three took most seriously the subtitle of their paper, Informing Practice and Research According to Ethical and Social Justice Principles. As ICE began to put their clients in jeopardy, threatening raids that would result in deportation, these three began to challenge the prescribed role of a researcher. The three research practitioners suddenly stopped hearing from the families they worked with. Phones went unanswered. No one came for parent groups. Fear was palpable in the community as people hid in their homes or fled the community. Anna, Melanie, and Ruben shattered the boundaries of research practitioners by picking up and delivering paychecks, groceries, school supplies for children. A final scholarly heartbreak of this powerful work and the paper it resulted in was that my cherished friend and colleague, Ruben Para-Cardona, was in fact the first author, but was advised by his immigration lawyer to conceal this in the position of third author, lest this brilliant and challenging paper impact his own immigration quest. Dear Ruben gave me permission to finally tell this story to all of you a decade later. This paper stands alone for its time. I have been fortunate to witness a developing change in our field. When I left the editorship, the Family Process Institute asked me to work each year with a small cohort of grantees chosen from submitted proposed manuscripts, doctoral students, practitioners, and newly minted assistant professors. Most striking to me are the profound changes in topics over time. For instance, papers from 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015 were mostly such papers that examine parent-adolescent relationships or emotion-focused therapy or the transition to parenthood or how parents interact to socialize their children, all fine topics, often mirroring the work of their dissertation advisors, when suddenly in 2017, topics began to change. I was gloriously reading The Experience of Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, and Transgender Latinos and Family Acceptance, or examining the meaning of silence and secrets among immigrant Latino teenage suicide attempters, or the negative impact of slavery on Black Americans and its oppressive aftermath, or how cultural factors may advance relationship dynamics among African American couples. Each year, more and more papers have been submitted and selected with strong themes and meanings of race, ethnicity, immigration, marginalization, and gender, until the arrival this year in which every paper save one reflects these critical topics. I have no doubt that we will continue to see the development of such papers as an innovative family therapy scholarship seeks to help us all not just understand, but have new ways to work with the extraordinarily painful era of violence related to difference and the enormity of police killings that assume the other is guilty and deserving of death for no crime at all, or at most, one that might merit a fine. My husband and I live in New York. The news strikes us daily with assaults on Asian and Pacific Islanders, mostly women and elderly men, left with broken bones and brain injuries, and a community left with palpable fear to walk the streets of their own neighborhoods. And this is certainly not confined to the East Coast. Such crimes largely go unnoticed by the non-Asian community, many of whom certainly do not know that attacks have gone unheeded or downplayed, while in fact, hate crimes against Asian and Pacific Islanders grew by 150% in 2020 alone, comprising 3,800 acknowledged hate crimes in this past year. We all heard about the horrific Atlanta massage parlor murders, but how many of us heard about the police killing in Pennsylvania of a suicidal young Asian man carrying an airsoft pellet gun? This made no national news, though I guarantee you that had the young man been white, the media would have been all over the story. I call to all of us for largely missing family system studies and papers and courses and workshops to address the needs of this community and our need to learn. I call to all of you to see to it that Asian and Pacific Islander graduate students are welcomed in our training programs and as faculty to teach us all. What is attended to and what is not in the media, television, print, radio, and of course, social media is shaping our beliefs about what is important and what is not. We have all been witnessing the tragedy of a young woman killed while on a trip with her boyfriend, a young white woman. Would there be the same focus were she a woman of color? Journalist Gwen Ifill calls this the missing white woman syndrome. And how many of us know that 740 Native American women have gone missing in the same Grand Teton region in the last few years? As family therapists, we need to teach this and write about this and publish the questions we must be asking. Latinx are killed by police at nearly twice the rate of white killings, and yet have been largely left out of the conversation regarding police brutality towards people of color. In Chicago and Minneapolis, Latinx are killed by police 6 times the rate of white people. Latinx are killed by police at a higher rate than whites in 24 of the nation's 50 largest cities. Latinx victims are often characterized by police as white or Black. Light-skinned Latinx are marked as white, while Afro-Latinx are marked as Black. 3 victims of police brutality in one city named Garcia and 2 named Lopez were not given any racial or ethnic designation. And so we lack any real data, keeping the Latinx community in most cities locked in an unequal system, preventing all of us from having a true and full view of police violence in this community, largely thought of, if thought of as at all, as having, quote, an immigration problem. And in a circular manner, fear regarding migration status prevents accurate reporting of police brutality in the Latinx community. If I talked about all the specifics of police violence against the African American community, we might be here the rest of today. Instead, I want to begin to close this talk with a plea to all of you that our thinking and our actions reflect the requirement that we build a field that places race, ethnicity, migration, and gender in all its forms, front and center in our theories and our practices. As people of color and white allies, I invite you to join me now in the African American ritual of saying a victim's name to hold the person in our hearts and in our memory of profound injustice. I will call out a name from among the far too many African Americans who died at the hands of police just in recent times, and provide a very brief description of their death. And I will then ask you together to say their name loudly and with love. George Floyd, murdered by police with a knee on his neck for 8 minutes and 48 seconds while crying out with his last breath for his mother. George Floyd, say his name. I can't hear you. Okay. Breonna Taylor, shot by police as she slept soundly and innocently in her own apartment. Breonna Taylor, say her name. Elijah Mcclain, murdered by police and EMS with a knee on his neck and an injection of ketamine. Elijah Mcclain, a gentle soul who learned to play the violin to soothe feral cats and simply walking with a scarf on his face to stay warm. Elijah Mcclain, say his name. Philando Castile, shot 7 times in front of his girlfriend and 4-year-old daughter during a routine traffic stop. Philando Castile, say his name. Sandra Bland, migrating to Texas on her way to begin a new job, stopped by police for failing to signal a turn, threatened by police with a taser, telling her, "I will light you up," all of which she recorded, found dead in a cell 3 days later. Sandra Bland, say her name. Tamir Rice, 12 years old and playing with a toy gun in a park. A child shot and killed by police. Tamir Rice, say his name. Michael Brown, killed by police in Ferguson, Missouri. Remember his saying, "Hands up, don't shoot," before police killed him. Michael Brown, say his name. Michael Brown. Eric Garner, killed in an illegal chokehold by police in Staten Island for selling loose cigarettes. Eric Garner, say his name. Eric Garner. Ahmaud Arbery, killed for jogging in a white neighborhood while the district attorney tried to hide the truth of his murder. Ahmaud Arbery, say his name. Ahmaud Arbery. George Floyd, say his name. George Floyd. Thank you.
Evan, thank you very much. I hope you can hear the applause. I know we were all moved by your talk. And we do have some time for people to make comments or questions. If you're going to do that, please use one of the microphones and face the center of the room so that the cameras can pick you up and Evan can see you. I think people are still somewhat stunned, Evan. Very powerful.
Thank you.
Any microphone is fine. Just take your mask off so we can understand you. Thank you. And say your name.
Hi, my name's Tina Ricks. I just have a
Hi.
comment. I just felt, it felt good to hear someone that doesn't look like me, acknowledge all of that trauma that people that are minorities go through. It was very touching. That's all I wanted to say, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Evan. It's my honor and my privilege to have this experience and to be with you in this way. And I'm just so grateful for what you do and what you have done historically to make the pathway for MFTs to continue to do this work and to hear your name and to hear about the work that you do. I was moved by what you said about the philosophy of marriage and family therapy, and that is not a modality, it is a philosophy. And as I work at a university, I want to ask you, and I know you said about these papers, to encourage people to write these papers about the injustice, and to make sure that they're published. So I just wanted to ask you, in that same way of talking about MFT as a philosophy, what would you recommend for professors such as myself to do to make that a movement in the work that we do?
That's quite a question. Well, I think just taking the position that that's what this is and explaining that to students, because I certainly get quite frustrated, as I'm sure you do, when students go on internship And they're supposed to be seeing couples and families and learning how to do this kind of social justice work as well. And instead, most places give them individuals and say, "Oh, you're not ready," and and that family therapy is simply, as I said in the paper, treated as, quote, a modality. And I think all we can do is take this position with our students. No, it's not a modality. It's a movement. And we need to create, especially this younger generation, what is this movement? What's it going to be? And take the position about race and gender as we're teaching, ethnicity, immigration, and homophobia. And I think the more we do that, and I know at Mercy, I mean, we're blessed because we have such a diverse student body. And so they bring the stories and they bring what they have experienced. And we're able to then help them translate that to what they're going to do in the therapy that they practice. I hope that begins to answer a very complex question. And thank you for it.
Hi, Evan. Good to see you. It's Martha Sullivan. Nice to see
Hi.
you this morning. And thank you so much for your presentation. I also want to pick up on the notion you put forth of our field becoming again, I'll insert the word again, a movement and not just a modality. Because I've been concerned for a long time that family therapy is very marginalized. So we finally get to the point where we talk about marginalized populations, but we don't talk enough about the field being marginalized, which my position is that it is. And so when the institutes and the universities train people to go into the field, more than likely, they're going to go into a not-for-profit, a community center, a hospital program, a public sector organization, and this is what they're going to be faced with: a caseload of 65 to 85 patients, individual treatment, and even group is promoted for, sometimes more, let's say, goals of efficiency, even more than clinical goals. And family therapy is marginalized in the sense that it's something else that we can say that we do. And you will have a pocket of people, maybe here or there, who are trying their best to do it. And I think that as systemic operators, we have not taken our own best advice because we have not moved into those sectors, moved into leadership, moved into policy positions, taken roles as commissioners, directors of programs, chiefs of psychiatry, and so forth, where we could turn things around. So that's what I would offer as an additional challenge to our field, to do exactly what I'm so happy to hear you put forward. We need to be a movement again and not just a modality. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Martha, and thank you for all your work.
Carmen Knudsen-Martin here. And building off the idea of a movement and what Martha just said, it's not an accident that all those articles that you cited in Family Process are being sent to Family Process. Every year when I'm teaching my classes, I go through the major family therapy journals to look to see what new articles are out, and I'm teaching classes like equity and family therapy. On one hand, I'm proud to say all these articles are in Family Process, but it's also very sad. I wanted to include articles from all the journals, but the articles that are addressing social justice issues, they're in Family Process.
Thank you, Carmen. Yes, and no small thanks to the work that you have done in that direction.
When I was on the Family Process Institute board, along with people here, and when you were the editor, and then when Jay took over, and when Marlene and William and such, the board, the Family Process Institute board, made a conscious decision to promote and support those kind of articles. And so that's the kind of leadership and that's really important, carried out by the editors, but it was a board decision.
Jay LeBeau, I want to...
Go closer to the mic, please, Jay.
Yeah, Jay LeBeau, I want to thank Evan for her comments about the journal the last few years, and Carmen as well for that thought, and Evan in turn, in terms of really having laid down that ground right where family process is recognized that way. I also want to echo Martha's thought, but I want to actually here just ask you a nerdy editor question, if it's okay. The nerdy editor question is, yes, we get an enormous number of papers, we publish an enormous number of papers about marginalized families and systemic kind of issues. How do you tell what do you do, let me put it this way, what do you do when those papers are authored in a non-systemic kind of way, actually with, often with sort of unconscious, racist, underlying issues, right? What would you do when such a paper appeared?
I think,
well
Jay,
executed, but with that kind of underlying.
right.
Well,
mean,
well
there's a-
executed, except for that, I should say.
Yeah, well, except for that. You know, there's a lot of well-executed papers that shouldn't necessarily be published, especially in family process. And so if you as the editor and any of your associate editors are reading these papers and reading even good reviews, but you read into it that, no, this ignores the most important things today. And not only that, it's got, as you say, an undercurrent of racism. No, those are not papers that should publish in family process. And I think as editor in a decision letter, you can tell people that, because that starts to educate. And that would be my hope anyway, that starts to educate rather than raise defensiveness.
Great. One final comment?
Thank you, Evan, for that really awe-inspiring presentation. I appreciate very much the acknowledgement of what had to be done in order to increase women editors in the field. And we have that same issue now without having any BIPOC editors of any major family therapy journals. And toward that end, Family Process has established an editorial fellowship. And so I'm hoping that all of you will encourage BIPOC students, associates to look on the site and apply. We extended the deadline to October 31st. But those stories and those articles and that thinking is also going to need some people at the helm, just as Martha was describing, that we need to be in positions to make those differences. And I was so happy to hear you speak about policy because I think that too often we limit ourselves to only thinking about what we can do in the therapy room as opposed to being at the table where lots of decisions are being made. And so I too think that, as Carmen stated, Family Process, the board, has made a conscious decision and commitment to pushing the envelope, and perhaps that will take us back into the movement that you so aptly described that family therapy once was. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Evan. We wish you could be here with us because we'd love to hear your input for the rest of the meeting, but we understand that that can't happen. Thank you again so much for a really inspiring
So much.
talk. Thank you.